Hey there everyone! Today we're going to be making these beautiful paper fairy house luminaries. The supplies you're going to need for this project are a Cricut machine. You may also want your deboss tip if you own a maker, a scoring stylus, or a scoring wheel. You'll also need a glue gun, some form of liquid glue. I use Tombow liquid glue. You may also want a pen, some moss, and grass to decorate your fairy house with inside of a bowl. And for the actual fairy structure, you're going to need 65-pound cardstock and some text weight paper. You'll also need black vinyl and transfer tape for our little fairy silhouette. You'll need crepe paper for the roof and tea lights to light up your paper fairy house. And of course, you'll need the fairy house templates, which are completely free on my blog and linked below this video, as well as a link to all of these exact supplies that I use. So be sure to visit that link.
Okay, so we're here to make this super cute paper fairy house, and I'm teaching this under the assumption that you are using a Cricut machine, specifically a Cricut Maker, but you can also do this with the Explorer. You would just need to either use cardstock paper in place of the crepe paper petals, or you would just need to hand cut the crepe paper, because the Maker is the only one that cuts crepe paper. So to get started here, let me just review supplies here for you real quick. This is specifically what I use. This does not mean you can't use different materials, and doesn't mean you can't change things up a little bit. So I have 65-pound cardstock for the roof and for the base of the fairy house. And then I have a text weight metallic cardstock here. I also used pens to draw this sort of wood texture. And I also debossed this surface. So while it's a little hard to see on the camera, if you were to look up close in person, you would see a lot of texture on this. You would see the ink, you would see the glitter background paper that I used, and you'd also see some debossing, so it has a lot of texture to it. You're also going to need to have some liquid glue on hand for the smaller pieces, and I also use a hot glue for some of the larger things, like when we're gluing the petals together. So, oh, and vinyl. I use this little cutout here of this fairy that you probably can't see very well because it's not weeded yet, but we are going to put that on the door so that when we put a tea light in it, or some fairy lights in it, whatever you choose to do with it, you can see the fairy through the inside of the house. So that's optional, but I use vinyl for that, adhesive vinyl for that. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's start assembling this, starting with the base of the fairy house. So I'm going to set a couple of these things aside. I just wanted to show you some of the tools I used, and if you have not watched part 1 of this, where I show you the back end setup of how to do all of this, if you're using things like the deboss tool and the wavy edge tool for the petals and the scoring wheel, then make sure you watch part 1, because that will clear up any questions you might be having right now as we actually start building this craft. So I'm going to set a couple of these things aside because I don't need them quite yet. We're going to build the base of this first. So I am going to go ahead and start folding everything along the scored lines. So with this particular one, I actually scored it first with my Cricut Maker and the scoring wheel. Then I drew with a pen, then I debossed it, then it cut out. So there was a lot going on with this piece, but it's really cool because it puts a lot of character into it. So you'll just fold along your score lines here. This is a project that I'm actually going to be putting as a bonus inside of my course, Cutting Edge Crafters, which is all about teaching you how to master your Cricut machine and how to draw your own SVG files. I actually am going to be doing a lesson inside of the course on how to draw this fairy house. That is, of course, exclusive to our students, but I wanted to share this little project here with everybody because it's a great project if you are not yet familiar with using the new Cricut Maker tools. If you're wondering, you know, hey, is this something I want to use? Maybe you bought them, you just haven't played with them yet. So this is a really great project to kind of play around with those. So I'm using a glitter paper here, and it's being a little temperamental because it's a thick paper. So I'm just taking my time folding it here. Okay. So I have all of my edges folded here, and then we're just going to glue this closed first before we do the bottom. This really helps keep everything properly aligned. It might be tempting to actually glue along the bottom first, but don't do that. I've tried it and it doesn't work as well. So I'm using for this part, you can use the liquid glue. For this part, I find it's okay to use a hot glue. It holds pretty well. So I'm just going to do that and place this right on. Like that. Okay. Okay, and so the next part here is going to be to glue the bottom closed here. And for this part, I do use liquid glue because it works a little better. You kind of have to have more than 30 seconds to get this kind of folded in there. So I don't like using hot glue because sometimes it dries really quickly and then you're just left with kind of icky glue everywhere. So I use Tombow liquid clear glue, and it works really well. Okay, and then just kind of get it set up there and just carefully push this in. Get all your little tabs going in there. There we go. And then it can be helpful to flip it over and kind of push the edges of the bottom to the inside so it's making good contact and it's going to be glued exactly where it needs to be. Okay. And you might want to let this set aside for just a moment or two before you continue with it, just to let the glue set up just a tad here. But you should have the basic structure kind of going with it here. Now, the next step is going to be to work on the roof and the windows and the door. And you technically, if it's easier for you, you can glue these on before you close this up if you want to. I find honestly, there's not much difference between gluing it before or after you close the house together. So I just kind of do it afterwards. It's just kind of how I naturally do it in my mind. So we're going to glue the windows and the doors on in just a minute once that sets up a little bit more. In the meantime, while I'm letting that glue set up, we're going to just go ahead and fold this here, which is the base of the roof that we're going to be covering in petals. In my case, you could also cover it in some greenery, like some leaves or something that you might want to cut out. So like I said, this is a really playful craft. Don't get too rigid with it. Don't feel like you have to copy everything I did exactly. Get playful with it. And you notice I used very playful colors for this one. I made another fairy house, which I will show you at the end. It's a little more traditional with like the brown wood, like it's made from a tree or built into a tree. But this one I kind of wanted to do some fun colors with. So all I'm doing here is I'm just folding along those score lines that my Cricut used the scoring wheel and it scored for me. So I'm just folding along that and then I'm going to glue. And it's okay if it's not perfect because we're actually going to be covering this up. If you don't want to cover this up, you don't have to, but I like to add some extra character to things by adding like some more detail with petals or leaves or something like that. And so then this will just sit directly on top of our house here, like so, and it looks kind of small for it right now, but that's actually the point because I made this once before. Let me show you real quick with a bigger roof, and if you make a really big roof, it can sometimes, especially once you get the petals on, it can hang down so low that you can't really see the windows and the door. And if you're wanting to do a little fairy silhouette that we're going to do at the end, you may not be able to see it. So I like having a more shallow roof because it lets that overhang of the petals kind of stand out more. And then if you want to do it the other way, you can enlarge the roof if you're using your cutting machine. But I've done it both ways, and I personally like the smaller roof. So this is how it's going to sit on top, and you'll put your tea light into it once we get the rest built. So this has had a chance to set up now, and now we're just going to work on gluing on the doors and the windows. Okay, so first I'm going to add my windows on here. And this is where I'm going to use my liquid glue again, because it's very helpful. If you buy this exact glue brand, it has double sides to it. So this side is more of a fine point side, and this side is more if you're wanting to spread the glue. Given the size of these windows, I'm going to go with the fine point side. You could probably do either, but we're going to go with the fine point side here. So I'm just going to add a very small dots of glue right there, and then we're going to pick it up and place it onto the fairy house. Make sure to place it over the window ones. There's a door one, and the door one is a different size, so don't accidentally place it on the door cutout because it won't match up. And then we're just going to repeat. Let's glue. This would be a really fun craft for your kiddos to do. You could cut the pieces out for them in advance and then have them like assemble it. I think that would be really cute and fun. These are probably going to end up in my daughter's room when I'm done with it. She's always grabbing my crafts when I'm done and wants them in her room. So I have a feeling that is where they will go. Okay, just making sure that that glue is grabbing on there. And then I'm going to go to the other side over here. Okay, so I have my windows now added on here. I'm going to set it aside while it sets up just for a minute. You might need to come back and push the paper down a couple more times. If any of your corners are lifting off, make sure to give that a little quick seal there. And while that's setting up for a moment, I'm going to work on my door. Now, whoops, I debossed my door and I just kind of left it a blank color here. Like I said, this house I'm doing here is a little bit more like a red and white fairy house with touches of brown. My other house is a little more traditional, but I left this white and I just added some texture to it, which you may not be able to see on camera. But I'm actually going to add this vinyl fairy behind here so that when you put a tea light in here, you should be able to see the fairy through the door. So I think that's just a cute little touch to add. So this is just regular adhesive vinyl, like I said at the beginning, and I'm just going to get this off real quick. This vinyl here real quick. A little fairy there. My weeding tool. And I didn't mention this, I apologize, in the original supplies, but of course, if you're doing anything with vinyl, you'll need transfer paper. So I'm just going to cut a very small piece. Just burnishing it really quick. If it doesn't lift up, then go back and burnish. And on the side that is not debossed, so this is my debossed side, this is my not debossed side, I'm just going to stick her right in the middle. And then peel that transfer tape off. Okay. And so you can't see it on camera, I'm sure. You can see her obviously on this side. You can't see her really on this side, but if you were to shine a light underneath, you would be able to see the silhouette, which is what we're going to do when we have a tea light in here. So you want to put this side, of course, on the inside of the house. So go ahead and glue this on right here. For this part, because I don't want to get any glue on the fairy, I'm just gonna put it right here on the house. I don't know if you can hear my doggy barking in the background. He does not like our mailman, UPS guy, the FedEx guy. And since we are Amazon Prime hoarders, that pretty much means 7 days a week he's barking. Okay, so I added a little glue there. And I'm just going to put that door on. Just make sure you push it on there so it makes good contact and it's flat. If you get any glue on your hands, just take a minute to kind of like rub it off because you don't want to like make the ink bleed if you did use a pen like I did. And I'm using a 50-pound cardstock for the door because you want it to be like thin enough that you could see that silhouette through once we shine light behind it. So don't use an overly thick cardstock or you probably won't be able to see your fairy. Okay, so that part is done. And the next part we need to finish is the roof. So we have the roof here. I'm just going to set this aside, let the door kind of sit up there and dry. I need to press it a couple more times. All right, and I'm using crepe paper for this part. You can use cardstock if you prefer. You can do this with leaves if you don't want to make it look like a flower on top. So whatever you prefer, it's not a big deal. I used crepe paper, like I said, with my maker, and the maker, you can either use the rotary blade or you can use the new wavy edge blade, new as of my time right now. And you can sort of see a subtle wavy texture that it gave it. So I thought that was really cool. I just changed my line type to wavy in Design Space, which again I go over in the first video. For this part here, I am just going to actually be curling the petals like this. Just giving them a little bit of depth. Traditionally with crepe paper, you would stretch from the center and cup the petals like so. So that's an option if you want to play around with a different way to work with the petal on the roof. Maybe if you wanted to have it coming like this, maybe facing upwards, but I'm going to actually have my petals facing down like this, kind of like a sloping roof. So that's why I'm going with that avenue. So I'm just going to do this really quick. I'm just using the Cricut scraper tool here. You probably have one on hand if you're already a Cricut owner. I suspect many of you are. And I didn't mention this a minute ago. I have, let me recount, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10, 2, 4, 6, okay, yeah, I have 10 of these. But depending on how big you make your roof, if you decided to go bigger than what I did, you may need more. So if you're following me exactly, I used 10. I may not need all 10. We'll have to see when I actually put it together. I may only need 8 or 9. So what I do here is I just grab my glue gun at this point and I just add a little glue along the inner side of one and overlap about a 30, 40 degree, 45 degree angle there. And then I keep going. This is actually the way I make my Luminaries crepe paper flower, which is on my blog, abbyhirstencollections.com. It's actually a freebie. So I thought I would try it this way to create a roof. That would be fun. See what I have here. Right now I have 7 petals. Looks like I need 1 or 2 more. Okay, that should be enough to close it. Yep. Okay, that's perfect. So now, now that I have enough to cover this, I'm just going to add a little bit of glue to the roof and then close this over it. I'm just adding sort of a little circle of glue there, and then it will be closing that right over the top. Now, if you want to finish this off a little bit more on top, hang on 1 second, might need to add a little glue to that overlapping petal to make it stay down like the others. Okay, there we go. Now, if you want to make this look a little bit more finished on the top here, you could add like some greenery if you want to make it look like it was a flower picked out of a garden or something like that. So for example, I could maybe do like, this is just a random piece I cut out, a random leaf piece I cut out, and I'll include this in the download as well. You can just curl it if you want to, the same way we did with the petals. Now, if I were to try and sit this on here, it would kind of not sit correctly because, you know, this is kind of comes to a point. So the way I've gotten around this in the past is I'll use a hole punch to create sort of a hole. And then I'll add a little bit of glue and then push that down over it like that. So adding a little glue to the inside here. And then pushing that down, and this just makes it look a tiny bit more finished. If you wanted to get really fancy, you could always maybe like glue a little stem on there of like wire or something like that. I like mine like this. I think it looks pretty cute like that. And then, of course, you would place your roof on top of your fairy house, like so. And you would have a cute little fairy house like this, and right now, you'll see some pictures in just a second where I capture more of the final look of it here. Right now, it's kind of just looking kind of cute, but not complete, and when you put the tea light in it, it will look a lot more complete. Now, for mine here, my petals didn't come all the way down, so ideally, I would maybe make another row of petals and I would tuck them around the inside like so. So here is what that looks like when I add that extra layer of petals underneath. So it kind of finishes it off just a little bit more, gives it more detail and depth. And if you wanna, if you're not happy with like this being kind of like this on top, like it might still look a little unfinished to some, I feel like it still looks a little bit unfinished. So I take a little flower punch. Let me see if I can show you guys. I buy these online or at craft stores. I just take a little tiny flower punch and a little sticker rhinestone, and I just make this little 2-layered piece. And I'll include this little mini flower in the cut files as well. If you want your machine to cut it out with, just make sure you use cardstock for intricate cuts. It'll cut best that way. That's why I generally don't cut these with my machine. I just use the punch because it's really easy to just punch really quickly. And then I would just glue right on top to give that one final finishing touch. Or you could do some sort of stem if you wanted to. I think this is kind of cute. There we go. And now it just looks a little bit more tidy and finished and extra cute. And if your roof keeps falling, look on the inside because each of these matches up to a side. So if it's falling, it's because it's probably not matched up. You want it to be matching to its side. And then it will stay. But this is how you would make a very cute, very easy little fairy craft, and I just think these would be really fun for kids. And this is the door and the fairies behind it, so when you put a tea light in it, you will see her shine through it. So very cute, very sweet kids craft that you could do, and I hope you liked this tutorial. Be sure to visit my blog for more tutorials, abbykirstencollections.com. Oh, and here, let me show you my other one. I haven't put my door on the other fairy house yet, but this is what it would look like if you were to use a brown paper and then do a brown pen. So I sort of created that debossed and wood look that way. And then I created a pink flower fairy house topper here, which sits on like so. And this one I made a little deeper, so it hangs a little bit lower over the fairy house, which I don't personally care for because I feel like I can't see my fairy as well. So I'm making something actually to elevate it a little bit, but if you follow the instructions for the measurements for the first one, you won't have that problem. So that is how you do the little fairy houses, and I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. And if you want to learn how to design your own SVG files like these here, be sure to visit my blog and make sure you sign up for my course, The Cutting Edge Crafters. I'll see you guys in the next video.